and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe falls short of an apology for Japan's aggression in World War II, but offers condolences for lives lost at Pearl Harbor. And the split in South Korea's ruling party leaves the main opposition group the dominant force in parliament, while Ban Ki-moon takes an early lead if a presidential election will be held. We would like to begin our program today from Pearl Harbor, where Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has wrapped up his visit to the U.S. naval base. Abe and U.S. President Barack Obama commemorated the victims of Japan's World War II attack. He has become the first Japanese leader to visit the memorial on the site of the USS Arizona, but as expected, failed to offer an apology for the attack. And his Asian neighbors keep on wondering why Abe didn't first reconcile with the parts of Asia victimized by Japanese wartime aggression.
With President Barack Obama at his side, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe entered the USS Arizona Memorial, which sits atop a sunken battleship in Pearl Harbor. He saw the names of more than 1,000 sailors who died during the attack on December 7, 1941. Abe later said he was rendered speechless and that he could almost discern the voices of those crewmen. Despite criticism from some historians in Asian countries, including China, Abe did not apologize for wartime atrocities, but instead offered sympathy.
I offer my sincere and everlasting condolences to the souls of those who lost their lives here, as well as to the spirits of all the brave men and women whose lives were taken by a war that commenced in this very place, and also to the souls of the countless innocent people who became victims of the war. We must never repeat the horrors of war again.
Also in the audience, World War II veterans, including members of the 442nd Infantry Regiment, an all-Japanese-American unit that became one of the most decorated in U.S. military history.
And after the war, it's important that the countries reconcile each other and become friendly and continue on and try to influence the rest of the world to maintain peace.
World War II veteran Robert Lee, who was a 20-year-old civilian living by Pearl Harbor during the attack, recalls grabbing his rifle and firing at Japanese warplanes in the sky.
We are long overdue for this reconciliation, long overdue. But as I've learned in my 95 years, hate is the greatest destroyer of all, and I put it aside long ago.
The fruits of peace always outweigh the plunder of war. This is the enduring truth of this hallowed harbor.
President Obama's closing remarks could be viewed as a message toward countries abroad and divisions within the United States. He said, when hatred burns hottest, we must resist the urge to turn inward. He says we can't choose our history, but that we can choose what lessons to chart our future. Mark New, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii.
While charting our future, history must never be forgotten. A group of 53 scholars and experts from various countries have written an open letter to the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, urging him to face up to Japan's wartime aggression. The letter argues that Mr. Abe should not just mourn the Americans who died in the Pearl Harbor attack, but also the victims in China, on the Korean Peninsula, and also in other Asian countries.
That Mr. Abe went to Pearl Harbor was good. But while the Japanese killed more than 2,400 American soldiers, they also killed tens of thousands in Nanjing in China and tens of thousands in Malaysia during the wartime. It is also said 30,000 were killed in Japan's biological and chemical warfare research and development in China. Japan caused such vast damage to Asia by its aggression. If he goes to Pearl Harbor and commemorates the American war dead, I demand he also commemorates those killed in Asia.
on Abe's visit to Pearl Harbor and its implications. We are joined here in Beijing, Professor Zhu Feng, Professor of International Relations at Nanjing University. In Tallahassee, Kurt Peeler, a Director and Associate Professor of History Institute on World War II and the Human Experience Department of History at the Florida State University. In Tokyo, Japan, we are joined by Mr. Yorizumi Watanabe, a Professor of International Political Economy at the Faculty of Policy Management at Keio University. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you for joining us in this discussion. First of all, I want to go to Professor Watanabe briefly. Shall we reflect a bit about the words used by Prime Minister Abe during his speech in Pearl Harbor? He talked many times about the victims, Professor Watanabe, without necessarily explaining what he meant when he talked about the victims. Who were the victims? Secondly, he has been talking about speechless entirely and also utter silence, yet fail to apologize. Professor Watanabe, from your perspective, how should we understand this?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Great to have you, sir.
I'd like to ask, yes, thank you. I'd like to answer your first question. I think the Mr. Prime Minister's idea was express his deepest regret, and also the very deep sort of sense of reconciliation, and also, pay tribute, particularly to those who have been killed in the opening of this Pacific War at Pearl Harbor. So that was the kind of the first group of people that he wanted to address. But at the same time, he mentioned that all those people who have been killed in the Pacific War. So it's not only limited to those who have been killed in the Pearl Harbor attack by Japanese forces, but also, his idea was to cover entire dead, those who sacrificed themselves during this 4-year war in the Pacific.
Professor Watanabe, I certainly heard your word. Of course, you are not responsible for coming up with the specific text of what Prime Minister Abe said, of course, at the Pearl Harbor. But what you have just explained is a little bit away from what he said. In fact, he did not mention at all about Asia Pacific, this phrase, during throughout his whole speech. And he never mentioned specifically what those victims that he was referring to in his speech. On that point, I would like to go back to Professor Peeler in the United States. Professor Peeler, we have heard from the Japanese Prime Minister that he talked about the partnership and alliance of hope with the United States. He talked about tolerance and reconciliation. But Professor Peeler, as we all know about history, it has to be remembrance and reconciliation. What do you make of this very different phrase coming from the Prime Minister of Japan?
Well, I think the Pearl Harbor visit for the Prime Minister of Japan was really a way to talk to the American people. It was also an opportunity to have a diplomatic meeting with President Obama, and I think the American government certainly, and I think most Americans, do not seek an apology from Japan. I think there has been a great deal of reconciliation by both countries, and I think one of the reasons was that most war crimes against the United States during World War II were directed at American GIs. American civilians were spared, for the most part, from many of the war crimes of Japan. So we have a very sort of different war that we experienced in the United States. And I think Americans don't have a great understanding of the extent of Japanese war crimes, particularly in China, but also Korea, the Philippines, and other parts of Asia. So I think there's a gap. Also, I think Americans really think of World War II as starting for them in 1941, when in fact China had been in war since 1937 with Japan.
Right, 1937 or even earlier. Professor Zhu, you are
you can even go back to 31.
31, yes, when it really began. Professor Zhu, now you are based in Nanjing, earlier named as Nanking. then the wartime capital of China. And the Nanking Massacre was one of the biggest atrocities done by the Japanese aggression during the Second World War. But my question for you, Professor, is when you are coming from that specific city, when you are looking at history, what do you make of Prime Minister Abe's words this time, that he talked about Americans, he talked about Japanese, and he talked about people from all over the world without at least once at all mentioning Asia Pacific or people in the Asia Pacific?
Yeah, I think that's also the points of the big controversy we can easily just identify from the Abe's visit to Hawaii. So then we heard the words of the tolerance and the reconciliation. Of course, the two words are very, very good. But the problem is tolerance to what? Tolerance to the Abe's historical revisionism? Tolerance to the Abe's some sort of ambition to revise Japan's peaceful constitution? Tolerance to Japan's some sort of selection in expressing their condolence, for example, just you mentioned. The victim is a very vague word. He definitely come to the U.S., but talking to the American people simply, but also very, very definitely. But the problem is victim is mostly including a lot of Asian victims. So how, I think the Chinese curiosity is always going that way. So why not Abe just to choose to visit Nanjing and also showing some sort of condolence? If he can do that, then I think Abe's sincerity probably will be at the position being harder to question. But if he just always chose the U.S. to show the condolence, then the question also unstoppably just coming out how sincere, how serious Abe will be to express such a reconciliation and tolerance.
I understand your point. So I have to go back to you, Professor Watanabe. Once again, I want to make very clear here, Professor Watanabe is not representing the Japanese government. He's not here also to explain about the Japanese government stance. But I do want to have your Japanese perspective, Professor Watanabe. What do you make of what Professor Zhu just said, that why not Prime Minister Abe come to Asian countries and cities, places where the biggest atrocities were done during the Second World War by the Japanese militaries then, and only chose the United States? One would have a second thought of exactly what he had in mind. Is it about the history, or is it about the alliance?
Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor again. You remember in August this year, Mr. Prime Minister Abe did a speech in which he mentioned about his deepest remorse and sort of feeling of culpability of the atrocities what had been committed by Japanese imperial forces during the World War II. And that was not only that speech in August, but many other speeches that he made. For instance, the one that he gave the speech at U.S. Congress last May. He also mentioned about his feeling of deepest remorse, not only to Americans, but also all the victims involved in the Pacific War. So I think the apologies have been done in the different places, but not here in Pearl Harbor. In Pearl Harbor, this is occasion to express the feeling of reconciliation between the very sort of bitter or bitterest enemies. This is the wording that Mr. Obama used during his speech today. You see, even the worst enemies like Japan and the United States can get together and work together for world peace and stability after 70, 75 years.
Okay.
You see, so this is more significant of his visit to Hawaii.
Do you buy that, Professor Zhu, that remorse equals to apology? And why has there been so many occasions that the Prime Minister of Japan, whether it's Prime Minister Abe or the others, shy away from just using simply the word apologize?
Yeah, I think rhetorically and literally we say, yes, Japan repeatedly doing that. But the problem is how it will work. It depends on how the other victim countries just feel like after they hear the Abe some sort of such a remorse or apology either way. But the problem is we also see the curiosity always is there. It's hard to erase. The reason is, I think, a couple of things. For example, so if the Abe is really very sincere and honest, he should just, come down to the Nanjing as well. So then we will see it's some sort of fair for the Asian victims. Just your question is very sharp. So yes, we also see the Abe partially sincere, but just definitely towards his ally, the United States. But the problem is we also needed to see some sort of equal sincerity for the Asian countries. So then we're also looking forward to the Abe's visit to Nanjing, if he could also just show his condolence and some sort of salutes to the lost or killed people in the Nanjing Memorial House. Then we will see that will be some sort of a bigger move. The Chinese would like to feel we have to ease down.
All right. Professor Piller, some have been comparing Germany and Japan over the past few decades since the Second World War. Germany renounced the war, Nazi war, and Japan never did, even though it renounced the use of military during the war and also had a peaceful constitution, even though that part of the constitution is likely to be changed very soon. Professor Piller, how would you make that comparison? What does it really say to us about Japanese attitude from your perspective?
Both the United States, but also our allies in World War II, were very clear that Germany must accept responsibility for its war crimes. And as early as the 1950s, for example, Germany paid reparations to the State of Israel for the war crimes it committed against the Jewish people. It suppressed the Nazi Party. It is a crime to deny the Holocaust in Germany. And it is vigorously prosecuted, beginning in the 1950s, war criminals, war crimes committed by Germans in World War II. By the same token, Germany was allowed to rearm. And there is no clause in the German constitution renouncing war. Japan has sort of had a very interesting track. It renounced war. And I think something we regret that the Japanese put in their constitution. During the Cold War, we very much relied on Japan as an ally against communism. And I think one of the legacies of the Cold War is there was not a full reckoning with the crimes committed by Nazi Germany and Japan. We forgave a lot of Japanese militarists who were able to re-enter the Japanese government. I would also say that while the Tokyo war crime trials were very important, they did not leave the same legacy as Nuremberg in Europe. Nuremberg, particularly within the United States, but also in Europe, has really been viewed as the gold standard of war crime trials. And at least in the United States, the Tokyo war crimes trials have largely been forgotten and largely seen as victor's justice, which is just simply not the case. So I think, if there were lessons for the Japanese, I would say think of how Germany has handled the legacy of World War II. I always think of, for example, Chancellor Willy Brandt's very, very dramatic visit to Warsaw to apologize. And I often think of how Israel and Germany often will condemn actions of anti-Semitism. They'll often issue statements the same day condemning issues of anti-Semitism around the world. So I think I would say I would just leave it. Yes, let me turn it over to others.
Okay, let's turn to others. Professor Watanabe, we also want to have a fair voice coming from you. Before I go to further details with you about this question, but I want to reflect a little bit facts with our audience over there. The Japanese Prime Minister, Mr. Shinzo Abe, has vowed that his country will not go to war this time in Pearl Harbor, something he declared many times earlier. But some have been suggesting Abe's pledge hardly matches the decisions his cabinet made. Take a look at this. Abe's cabinet has approved the country's biggest annual defense budget, 43% $2.6 billion US dollars will be spent on defense for the fiscal year starting in April. It will be 1.4% bigger from the initial budget for the current fiscal year. That, of course, is only one number over there. Meanwhile, the Japanese government is very keen on building its military, building its defense industries. Professor Watanabe, no one is arguing that Japan is having the biggest military budget so far in the Asia-Pacific region, but the tendency of an ever-rising military bill, together with the very possibility of erasing the peaceful constitution, the part of the peaceful, is a big concern. While at the same time, Japan has not, in the eyes of its Asian neighbors, recognized its atrocities during the war. Professor Watanabe, given such a mixture, what do you think should be the smart move from the Japanese government? Without the belief and the trust of the Asia-Pacific region, can the United States, your ally, really trust you?
Well, first of all, you see the 1.4% increase. Maybe, this is due to the, personnel cost, because you see the staff, servicemen and women in the Japan's defense force, they have to be paid, and this payment goes up, and also the exchange rate affect really, the amount in US dollar terms. But I hope that you remember that we have never lifted the ceiling of 1% to our entire budget.
But what about the change of the Constitution, Professor Watanabe? We don't want to go into the specific math because we can talk about the budget for a whole year, but we want to understand how others see your actions, I mean the actions of the Japanese government and military, and whether that reflection from the others is necessarily going to help you to be a peaceful country, and what can really help you to be a peaceful country without really recognize the details of the history. Very briefly from you, before I have the other two guests to wrap up with their points as well. Professor Watanabe, one sentence or two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I quite share with you that the past should not be forgotten, and we have to look forward. And I would like to just reassure that Japanese defense spending is not really, increasing. And it has a ceiling of 1% to its GDP. Okay.
Okay, so you repeat your point already.
When we talk about defense.
Thank you very much. We certainly get your perspective. Professor Peeler, before we go, 20 seconds for you as well.
I would just say one of the things that strikes me about Japan is how unmilitaristic it is, particularly compared to the 1930s and 40s. When I taught a semester in Japan, American history, my students there couldn't imagine serving in the Japanese military. And, one of the things I think we need to really think about is what is the future of Asia, and how Asia is changing, and how can we build a better both Asia, trans-Asia, including the United States, but really improve relations between all the countries involved in Asia.
Professor Zhu, final words for you as well, equally. What about Asia Pacific? Will the alliance between the United States and Japan help us to all forget about history and move forward in whatever direction that they want, or Japan wants?
I don't think so. I think the history is always there. It's some sort of, not just a reference, it's some sort of warning. So then I think the future peace and the stability of Asia Pacific should firmly and notably just rest away some sort of a very appropriate and a proper handling of the history. That's a very, very significant stepstone for all the regional members. We can just intensify cooperation and creating some sort of a forward-looking approach. Then we can get some sort of a historical bleeding lesson just behind us.
All right. I want to express my appreciation, also my colleagues, equally to the three of you, gentlemen, for coming over to our program and expressing your perspectives. Zhu Feng, Kurt Peeler, Yorizumi Watanabe, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. A split in South Korea's ruling Salary Party leaves the opposition the dominant force. Its effect on Park Geun-hye's political scandal after the break. You're still watching World Insight, coming to you Monday to Friday on CCTV News. We now turn to South Korea. 29 lawmakers have left the ruling Salary Party over the scandal that led to the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye. Their departure leaves the party with 99 seats in the 300-seat National Assembly. As early forerunners in the possible presidential election have emerged, where would the country go in the coming year?
South Korea's politics remains turbulent. Choi Soon-sil, the woman at the heart of suspended President Park Geun-hye's impeachment case, had been grilled. She apologized for causing the scandal plaguing his park, but declined to comment on allegations against her. On Tuesday, 29 lawmakers from Park's party, Saenuri, announced they are leaving to establish a new conservative party. Their decision to leave makes the main opposition party the largest political body in parliament.
Park loyalists have forgotten the true values of conservatism, which has resulted in the loss of the people's trust. Their loyalty to the president and ignorance of the people's voice and truth allowed Choi Soon-sil to meddle in state affairs.
The coming new party hopes outgoing UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will join them. In a recent survey, Ban was the virtual frontrunner if a presidential election was held today, although he has not dropped any hint if he's indeed running the possible poll next year.
Well, I'm not in a position to say anything publicly at this time. I have been closely watching what has been happening in Korea, my home country. I have seen many millions of people expressing their anger and frustration at the lack of good governance.
After the National Assembly voted to impeach Ms. Park earlier this month, stripping away her substantial executive powers, the Constitutional Court has begun hearing the case. The preparatory hearing will finish this year, and the first argument hearing is scheduled in January 3. Inevitably, South Korea's political troubles in 2016 will spill into 2017.
For more on South Korea's shaky politics, we are joined here in the Beijing studio once again Professor Zhu Feng, Professor of International Relations with the Nanjing University. In Seoul, South Korea, Choi Chun-hum, Vice President of the Institute for Peace and Unification of Korea. And in Boston, United States, Sun-Yoon Lee, a Kim Koo Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of the Tufts University. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen, helping us to understand the latest situation in South Korea. First of all, Professor Choi, what does it say? That the major party split? Does that give us the opportunity to have more imagination about how political parties might compete with one another and how new contenders might emerge this time in Korean politics?
Well, I think the possible contender will be the outgoing United Nations General Secretary, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. The problem is when or to which party he wants to join. So far, Mr. Ban Ki-moon has not yet declared which party, which political party he will join officially. But my guess is that a recently formed new party, called Conservative Party for Reform. I think the party will Mr. Ban Ki-moon hope to join.
Okay.
Because there are two or three reasons. First, the biggest opposition party already criticized Ban Ki-moon's bribery suspicion. So that's why I think Mr. Ban Ki-moon will not go to the opposition party. So So the possible candidate will be the recently formed new party.
I see. Well, Professor Lee, what about you? What do you think? How much credibility does Mr. Ban Ki-moon, after he finishes his term as Secretary General of the United Nations, really have when he goes back to the Korean politics? After all, he has never run for office before.
Mr. Pan enjoys a very positive image in the public eye in South Korea. He's had a distinguished career within the South Korean Foreign Ministry, rising to the top of the ministry, Foreign Minister, in the mid-2000s. He's finishing his 10 years in office as the head man at the UN. So the combination, the old Chinese or Confucian combination of the scholar bureaucrat is there. He's been the front runner for the past 2 years in the polls, so there's really no reason for him not to run. And I think he's basically announced to the world that he would run. Would he join the sinking Saenuri ruling party? I don't think so. That would be like parachuting into a sinking ship. There's no reason to do that. So as Professor Choi implied, I think it's more likely that Mr. Pan will run as an independent or set up his own party.
This is what Mr. Ban Ki-moon said earlier during an interview with the Korean media. He said this, and here I quote specifically, "I will devote my whole body to the work of the Republic of South Korea if what I have seen and experienced as United Nations Secretary General would help with the future." End of quote. Of course, in that way, people could interpret it that he is likely to run for the office, but he has never clearly yet announced that decision. And yet, according to the latest Real Meter poll carried out on Monday, Ban Ki-moon was slightly already ahead of the other presidential candidates last week. Ban garnered an approval rating of 23.3%, virtually neck and neck with Moon Jae-in, the former head of the Democratic Party, who earned a little more than 23%. Of course, the mayor, Mr. Lee Jae-myung, also came in as a third with over 12%, followed by Rep. Ah Chin-soo, former head of the People's Party. All of these are forerunners, and yet the numbers we have seen, the first two are pretty close to one another. It's really within the margin at this point. Professor Zhu, I want to come back to you. Even though China is not involved at all in the South Korean internal politics, but as South Korea's neighbor, important part for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. How is China observing the situation now on the Korean Peninsula? Will Mr. Ban Ki-moon, with his experiences as a leading candidate for the president, is he going to contribute much to the peace and stability, particularly on the Korean Peninsula?
Of course, in terms of the, I think Mr. Pan's gorgeous and fantastic, the experience. There's quite a few in the Korean politics will be better than him to be an excellent leader. But the problem is the things has getting unbelievably tricky because, first of all, I think my two Korean friends also mentioned Central Party now is split. Then second one, we'll see some sort of political scandal of the President Park Geun-hye probably also will tarnish something of the Mr. Ban Ki-moon because there's a long-term some sort of such a media report. Ban Ki-moon would like to line up with the ruling party, and he also would like to standing out, just being next presidential hopeful for the ruling party. So then I see the Moon Jae-in, the opposition party candidate now is just mounting his popularity, also just catching up with Mr. Ban Ki-moon. So then I will see probably it will be some sort of a very close race between the two political celebrities. But anyway, personally, I think that Ban Ki-moon will be some sort of a very hopeful candidate.
But will the already accusation coming from the opposition party about possible corruption scandals involving Mr. Ban likely to hurt him?
Yeah, I
already at
yes,
this very early stage, it seems.
Of course, we have to say it's a media coverage, but no one can exclude some sort of political ploy by some sort of opposition party.
Right.
Then I'm also very curious. Mr. Palm usually is very clean in his performance. He has long piled up some sort of repercussion and reputation. So I'm not totally sure for that kind of scandal reporting.
All right. Professor Choi, there has to be at least several tasks for the next president of South Korea, whoever that is. One, peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Second, reinterpret the alliance relationship with the United States with the upcoming president, Mr. Trump. And thirdly, have to figure out the relations South Korea has with its neighbors, such as China, with some of the earlier disputes the two countries have already had under the current President Park Geun-hye. Will Mr. Ban or others be able to have that capacity to deal with at least these three tasks?
Well, you mentioned the three very important tasks for South Korea is security, national security. I think Mr. Ban Ki-moon is the suitable and the promising candidate for to deal with these very complicated issues, because South Korea has to have an alliance as well as has to have a strategic partnership between with China. So far, Mr. Ban Ki-moon has a good experience, past experience as United Nations Secretary General. So he already acquainted with President Xi Jinping and Trump and the other world leaders. So that's a very strong merit for him, I think.
Well,
so that kind of understanding and acquaintance bring us to maintain the stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, in particular, and in general speaking, and Northeast Asia.
Okay, Professor Zhu, I have to come back to you before I go to Professor Lee. That is, we also see President Park Geun-hye earlier enjoyed discussions and interactions with the Chinese president, the U.S. president as well, and yet later the two parties really diverted their opinions, and we have such a number of concerns between China and South Korea. So will previous experience really likely to help the next upcoming South Korean president to deal with the current issues? And it seems that some of the issues have already at this point reached a very matured stage. Professor Zhu.
Yeah, I think the current lingering tension between the Beijing and Seoul over the missile defense system, of course, is very, very annoying. And
the location of that has already been chosen.
Yes, then we will see some sort of just acting president, we say. It's a current government of the Seoul also filed to just say put the THAAD system into the deployments much earlier than expected. Then it also will feel some sort of irritation on the Chinese side. I think at least the one lesson we can draw from current some sort of attention is no matter how we just talk in frequency or in some sort of a good manner, but the most important thing is we should share some sort of a better understanding. We also need just to cast some sort of sympathy to some sort of awkward position of our counterparts. So then I see some sort of real motive behind the Koreans' decision of the THAAD system deployment is very multiple. But at least we need to get the things at the table from the beginning.
Okay. We are not sure at this moment what exactly is the motivation, because at the very beginning there were some different words about who exactly made the decision given the current scandal. But I want to come back to you, Professor Lee, in Boston. It seems that there are several timelines. 180 days for the parliament to eventually decide, for the court to eventually decide. And then running up to the next presidential election, it could take another 60 days. This is already happening when a new U.S. president comes into power, when China is also having its very important political meetings once every several years. So how much will this give a leeway to the upcoming South Korean president to adjust his international relations position well? And will he or she be able to do that?
You know, historically, South Korea has rarely been the primary mover, the shaper of international politics in the region. Ironically, the much poorer, desperate North Korea has been the revisionist power calling the shots in terms of multinational negotiations on North Korea's nuclear weapons. So this is quite ironical, and it bodes not well for South Korea, that you have this power vacuum in South Korea for the next 6 months at least, when you have in all the major capitals of the world, in the region rather, in the Asia-Pacific, strong personality types in Donald Trump, Xi Jinping. Most people say that he's the strongest Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. You have a strong man type in Mr. Putin, Mr. Abe, who's internationally recognized and quite assertive in his own political views. So this power vacuum in South Korea does not bode well. Pan Ki-moon has a reputation for being very thoughtful, but also if we twist around the Confucian norm of doctrine of the mean, he does not take a stand on sensitive issues. So that is not really promising either. I think a leader, a national leader, needs to be decisive and have the courage to take difficult decisions and understand that he can't please everyone.
Well said. We'll see how things would evolve. As always, Sun Yung Lee, Choi Chun Hum, and Zhu Feng, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. That is all the time we have today. If you'd like to see more, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.